Welcome, everyone, to Season 4, Episode 128 of the Premier Pod. I'm your host, Yashvika, joined by my co-host, Tyler Chan. In this episode, we're primarily going to be spending a majority of the time talking about the big news that happened actually a day after we recorded our podcast last week, which was Newcastle United basically getting a new ownership. Mike Ashley has been booted out the club, and we have new owners in the Premier League that have caused a lot of controversy and a lot of talking points, especially among pundits and general consensus from the fan base, which has been really interesting. And we're excited to kind of dive into that and also mentioning some big injury updates from some of the top clubs in the Premier League. But to get it started, we do have to talk about the big news, which is Newcastle United having new owners and basically having a £3 million takeover that has taken over last week. And essentially, how the takeover is going to work is that I believe 70% of the club has been purchased by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, which is the PIF. And as Tyler has put in the docs, essentially a state savings account. And then the other 20% will also be held by um, I think it's called what is it the sports and entertainment. It's something. It's basically the UK holding for the fund. But the reason that the Premier League was allowed, or the reason the Premier League allowed this sale to go through, is because for the longest time there has been a stalemate with this sale. Because if you go back around this time last year, or just a couple months before, we were actually talking about this potential takeover happening during COVID times. But the reason it didn't happen was because of obviously a lot of the concerns morally with the Saudi Arabian backed government, but also there were a couple things. So one thing that allowed the Premier League to kind of lift that ban and just allow the sale to go through was that Saudi Arabia actually allowed BN Sports. They lifted the ban from BN Sports and allowed BN to broadcast Premier League games in Saudi Arabia. And BN is a huge Premier League's rights holder in the Middle East. So the fact that they were able to lift that up, the Premier League was happy about that, but also the Premier League essentially got assurances from the Saudi Arabian government and also the new owners from Newcastle that the Saudi Arabian government will not have its say in the transfer market and also in the board meetings for Newcastle United. Instead, it will be held by the Newcastle's new director, which is Amanda Staveley, and also the other governing UK members of Newcastle United. But if you ask a lot of casual fans and also a lot of non-Newcastle fans or people just across the football world, they don't really think this is that's going to be the case, because obviously if you're the Saudi Arabian government and you're putting um, this much money, like £3 million, sorry, music is going. Whoop, sorry, I had a couple technical difficulties. But if you're putting this much money, like around 800, like £300 million takeover into the move, and you're the Saudi Arabian government, you're not basically just going to say, no, I'm not going to have any dealings with the transfer market, any dealings with the board, any dealings with how the club is going to be run. So essentially, it's kind of like a handshake deal that they're going to stay out of the government or stay out of the Premier League, I guess, what would you call it, board meetings. But that's obviously not going to be the case. So it's a very interesting situation, and we're excited to break it down. But Tyler, it's kind of a whirlwind type of day or type of week in the Premier League, at least.
And I also went back into our old podcast just to figure out when exactly we last talked about this, and it was episode 72 on May 1st, 2020. So that's when originally this plan was supposed to go through, but then it just fell through last minute just because of all the controversy around the owner. And even though right now there is a lot of talks, it's like this is literally a state savings account for the Saudi Arabian government. How is this allowed? Is this the owner? It's basically a government, which is kind of weird.
Yeah,
But the Premier League has the power to rescind the ownership from the PIF if they have any kind of hint or any kind of awareness that the Saudi Arabian Prince Mohammed bin Salman, I hope I'm saying that right. It's spelled like Salman, but maybe it's a southern
Salman.
coming out. Salman.
Yeah,
But if they see any involvement from him running the club, then they have the right to just pull the plug, and then Newcastle are in the bin. So it's pretty high risk at the same time that they're even doing this takeover. But in terms of Newcastle fans' perspective, they finally got Mike Ashley out. That's like the biggest thing. They had their owner that's been just the bane of their existence, finally kicked out of the club, and now it's the richest owner of all time in the soccer world. We saw
Yeah.
like a stat, I believe last week, like Yosh and I shared it, where I believe the owner of this club, Newcastle now, is 10 times more wealthy than Manchester City's owners at like a valuation of like 400 billion or something. It was something insane.
Yeah.
And to put in perspective, that's more than all of the top 10 wealthiest clubs in the Premier League combined. And it's just this one owner.
That's
So
crazy.
this doesn't mean though that Newcastle can all of a sudden just buy Mbappe, Holland, and Neuer and Oblak, all those players all at one summer. Like they can't just
Hmm.
change all like that. They still have to fulfill financial fair play rules, which means they have to basically earn as much revenue back as they spend in terms of like AdSense, in terms of ticket sales, and just sponsorships. So we don't know how they're gonna do it exactly because Newcastle is a big brand, but they're gonna have to take some time just to get back into like the Champions League, Europa League, all those competitions that will give you reward money for being in those competitions, and also just getting their name out there. Because if you think about it, how many Newcastle fans do you know? It's
Not
like
not too many. Not too
not
many in the
many,
US at least.
and I'm pretty sure it's a lot bigger in Europe, obviously, because in the '90s, Newcastle was a very big club under Alan
Yeah.
Shearer,
Alan
and
Shearer,
then
like top record Premier League goal scorer, legend
and
of
then
the
even
club.
Michael Owen was there for a few. So
Hmm.
it's just kind of fallen from grace. And then their rivals, as you know, Sunderland, also not even in the Premier League.
In the bin.
They're in the bin. So I mean, it must be terrible for a Sunderland fan right now. Imagine seeing this takeover, but I think it'll be several years until we start seeing Newcastle kind of show the guns, show their muscles from getting this huge investment, this huge takeover, because there's still a lot of work to do. And according to Amanda Stavely, like their new director, who basically is Rebecca from Ted
Hmm.
Lasso, like not both on just like appearance wise, but also I believe like position wise at the I almost said at the firm at the company. No, I just said
Yeah.
at the company, at the club itself. But she's basically the representative for the PIF,
Hmm.
and she's basically deciding how transfers are done and like the main communicator between her and the board of the PIF. So it'll be interesting to see what their first move is because I think their first move is to determine how to keep Newcastle in the Premier League. Because right now they're sitting in 19th. It could be the most ironic thing where the most like historically expensive takeover, no, not expensive takeover, but like the most wealthy owners come in and then they get relegated. It's like
Hmm.
the most wealthy owners just managing like a championship side. There's no way. So they're going to be having to figure out how to get a new manager because it looks like Steve Bruce is on the way out too,
Hmm.
and that was like a big news. So we'll probably talk about that first. Where Steve Bruce, the current manager of Newcastle, he is not been the best. He's very conservative in terms of his tactics. He usually likes to put five in the back and is a lot more of a defensive manager. And he's not very creative either, despite kind of bringing in some creative juices into the team like Alan St. Maxim, Miguel Almiron, Callum Wilson, but just still don't really see that many goals. And they're still just kind of scraping away, barely getting out of relegation at times in
Hmm.
the previous season. So they're hoping to inject a new manager, but at this point, who would even come? Because I know whoever does come, it'd be for money and like the promise of potentially running a huge club. But off the top of my head, I don't really know that many managers that are just on the wings waiting to just
Yeah.
come in.
I was gonna say, I'll answer that, but I wanted to quickly, I guess, point the conversation real quickly back because I actually had a couple more questions about the actual ownership, and I guess, uh, real quickly, we'll answer the Steve Bruce one, but the reason that I guess the criticism has come, obviously, with the oil money and the takeover and just the amount of money being thrown in. That's one aspect of a lot of people not wanting this ownership to come in because we've seen the likes of PSG, Manchester City, basically become clubs like these mega huge backed state clubs because they have all this money and they basically paid their way to glory. But another thing that's also come into criticism for this, new regime at Newcastle is the crown prince. That essentially you had the journalist, one of the journalists actually There have been stories, and there have actually, I think, a government report actually linked him towards the killing of the journalist. So
Mhm.
that's also been a huge talking point between moral rights groups, is that how how did the Premier League allow someone that basically had his hand in murdering someone be the owner of a club? And that's kind of been a talking point that I've seen a lot of people bring up in, pundits, and also, casual fans, that how did the Premier League basically succumb to the money? Obviously, it's a lot of money, and the Premier League at the end of the day is a corporation, so they obviously want to get as much money as possible. But the fact that they let a ownership of this kind come in, even with the shady background of the past, where they have had those instances of basically having someone murdered, which is just an outrageous and absolutely just crazy thing to think about. But I wanted to real quickly ask, I guess an overarching theme is just, with this, we've seen, this kind of adds on to the oil club, and kind of like the this huge financial takeovers that have happened in other clubs with PSG, Manchester City, even Chelsea with Roman Abramovich. Even though he's not directly oil, he's a huge wealthy person from Russia come in to the club, inject money, and Chelsea have obviously become these huge superpowers because of it. But specifically looking at Manchester City, PSG, how they were essentially in 2010 almost nothing. New owners come in, inject a lot of money, and now they're these superpower clubs. And now Newcastle are potentially in that same running. But um, I wanted to hear your thoughts about overall how you think about in terms of the morality of the game, and kind of just where the game is heading now, because now it's just all about how much money do you have, and not about the history and the backstory of the club.
I feel like this particular instance, there's a lot of exceptions, a lot of things to point out that are like, ooh, that's a red flag right there. And obviously, the murdering of the journalist that's been accused towards the prince, like being the one who basically said to do it. Like that's probably like the biggest one. And also on top of that, just like human rights issues just going on in Saudi Arabia itself.
Yeah.
And all of that they're linking is like, well, that's with him, but the PIF is something different. He's that's just a whole other entity. I'm like, I don't know.
If
So
it's
there's
just literally
already so
savings
much.
account,
Yeah, it's literally a savings account. It's like, it's like, although it's like, Al Capone, kill all these people and he's part of the mob. It's like, well, his savings account, someone is no, it's different. It's not really. It's like it's his, but it's not actually him. It's like a pile of money. So I think that's what's going on here a little bit. Although this public saving account is like, I'm calling it a public savings, a public investment fund, but basically it's a savings account.
hmm
It's kind of run by a board of people too, and also a board of companies that are kind of involved because like they've also invested in other companies such as like Facebook, Uber, things like that. And basically the Saudi Arabian government is trying to, you know, differentiate what they're investing into just so that they can keep the country running because ultimately they're going to run out of oil and that's where all their money's coming from.
yeah.
So if they run out, then it's like, all right,
And
we need other revenue streams. So they're
yeah, and
kind
I
of investing in all these other things.
um
So to kind
yeah,
of go back to
and
your question.
well, I was gonna add, I was gonna interject here real quickly. I think also what's a lot of people have been bringing up, I guess the morality of it, um, that this is essentially another example of a regime or a government kind of coming in and like sports washing, which essentially that means is you have, I guess, these totalitarian governments that do a lot of shady stuff in their own government, but they buy a team or they put a lot of money into a sports organization or a team, and essentially they basically run that team like it's a perfect, type of person or perfect child. So it's almost like, hey, like, you can't criticize me. Look what I'm doing over here. Like I'm supporting, all the human rights. I'm supporting all the campaigns that the Premier League is putting out for at advancing human rights. I'm doing all of this. I'm, donating money to blah blah blah. But it also, when you do that, it also takes away from the fact that, hey, look what you're doing in your own backyard. It's stuff like that, and I think that's also been a point that a lot of human rights organizations, just general football fans in general, have been bringing up. It's just like, um, that overall theme of like, hey, you are doing this, but look at what you're doing in your own backyard. It's not the best things, or it's not, really the right things to do. But that's also been another point that's been brought up a lot, in these conversations with this new regime and ownership.
Mm. like sports washing. That's like a whole new thing that's kind of coming up recently, or it's all
Hmm.
these kind of, yeah, as you just mentioned, all these totalitarian governments. It's like, we're bringing you trophies, PSG. Like, hopefully you guys don't check what we're doing behind the scenes, but I mean, ultimately, like the reason why they're even investing in a Newcastle, it seems like is also just monetarily like a revenue based thing, just for their own
Hmm.
government, which is kind of weird to see. It's like in the future, government's just being held up by Newcastle United, at least for one of its streams. But
Hmm.
I think that's also the thing too. It's like the owners. I don't know if they're Newcastle fans. It's
Yeah,
just
I
like
doubt it.
I doubt it. It's just more like, all right, this is a good opportunity. It has a lot of rich history. They have a good stadium already. We can invest in the surrounding areas, and then hopefully it'll give us some returns. And then I even think they're trying to invest in certain like wind power and other kind of ways to create energy on that northeast side of England as well. So it's just like they're already in
Hmm.
the same area that they're kind of investing into. So it's like, this would be a good collateral just to put into the to the
Yeah,
to the fund, because £300 million is
it's a lot.
honestly for them a lot, but in the whole grand scheme of things, is not too much in what they
Yeah.
have. So I think in terms of morality, obviously they don't really. I don't think they really care, and obviously they don't really care given like what they're doing in the backyard, but also the fact that they're purchasing this club. It could have been any club really. It just so
Yeah.
happened to be Newcastle.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
what I'm
It's
thinking for this.
hmm But you were mentioning, I like when before I interjected, what like you were asking the question on, was it the ownership, or not Steve Bruce, but it was right before I interjected with the past point.
I forgot what it was.
Blanket.
I'm
But
blanking too.
I know that that's also been a thing that's come up, is just that sports washing thing. But and I was just going to ask you in general, what you think, just PSG, Manchester City, and Newcastle coming in with this big money. Um,
Hmm.
like do you think that just ruins the game, or that I don't know. I'm just indifferent, because I feel like for the longest time, at least, I feel like, people always make the joke that the game's gone, but I feel like the game has been partially gone for a while now, because they have been, um, you know, kind of just siding with the power of money. Obviously, FIFA and UEFA have been really corrupt organizations for the longest time. And, we're seeing just a lot of people just use football for the money and not really the purity of the game, which is kind of escaping football right now.
Mm. I feel like being a fan of a team that is pretty wealthy, like Liverpool, and then also for you, yes, Manchester United, we're a little biased just because like we're already in that circle where it's like, the team will probably do all right for the foreseeable future and the
Hmm.
immediate now. But for a team like Newcastle, I feel like they would hop on this train immediately. It's like, yeah, of course we'll take the money. And it's not always a guarantee, because there was a team in the 90s, like Blackburn Rovers, that had the similar kind of takeover where they like boomed really quickly, and then they like fell off the page, and they're not even in the Premier League anymore. So it's
Hmm.
really a thing also of like how much can this board really plan out successfully how to bring Newcastle success and how to also bring in the right players, because they can't just be pulling like a Barcelona, just spending like hundreds of millions on players and then putting themselves in $1 billion of debt,
Yeah.
because that could happen. So they have to be smart with the money too. And I mean, ultimately, I also heard that they're trying to invest in like the local area around the stadium and like develop this training grounds, things like that. So there is some collateral good, I feel like, that could come out of just having money and just investing in not only Newcastle United, but also Newcastle, the town, as an infrastructure reason. But in terms of the game, if I see like Holland, Mbappe, and Oblak on Newcastle in like the next 7 years, I'll be kind of upset. I will say that. But if they develop their own training staff, like their own academy, and they do it in a way where it kind of brings back the glory to the club and kind of brings, more fans the right way, kind of like how, like Liverpool are right now, the way Arsenal's trying to be under Mikel Arteta, and trying to, and bring up players more naturally and not just be like a Galactico and just buy the current best player on the market every single season. And that's how they became who they are, kind of like Manchester City in the past decade. Then, it kind of depends. So I kind of have to see how Newcastle develops before kind of making that decision. But they have the keys to do, a more moral way of kind of developing the
Hmm.
club and bringing them glory, but they can also very easily, since they have all this money, to just go south and just, just go ham and just buy
Yeah.
players out the wazoo.
And oddly enough, as bad of an owner Mike Ashley was in terms of never investing, the fact that he hadn't invest so much is that actually ended up becoming a benefit for Newcastle right now, because the fact that he didn't spend a ton of money for the past 3 or past couple of years, Newcastle actually ended up with a huge net profit in their their balance sheet. So now that the new owners have come in, they also have their money to play with, but also on top of that, they have Mike Ashley's money to play with as well, that he basically did by not purchasing or not buying or not investing a ton into the club. So oddly enough, it just ended up working out for Newcastle. But I wanted to, I guess, go back to your thing about Steve Bruce in terms of the rumors and their next steps on what they're trying to do. I saw there were some pictures of the new, Amanda Staveley. I wish I'm pronouncing the last name correctly, but Amanda, the new director for Newcastle, her and her husband were actually on the training ground, I think, a couple days ago for the first time. And just watching first team practice. And I know a lot of the coverage has been on Steve Bruce. Basically, he's going to be one of the first people out. He still has a job right now, and there were rumors today that that they were trying to tout Brendan Rodgers to be the new manager for their big project, but those rumors have essentially gone downwind because Leicester or Brendan Rodgers, they haven't put out a statement, but rumors from people close to Brendan Rodgers' camp is that he's not interested in going to Newcastle. He wants to stay at Leicester City, because there was actually a report that once Pep Guardiola finishes up his contract with Manchester City, um, they are kind of touting Brendan Rodgers to kind of take over Pep Guardiola. So that's another thing. But um, right now they're trying to find that, I guess, that manager to lead the project. And I know we're Manchester City, um, before they obviously got Manuel Pellegrini or forgetting the manager.
Mancini.
Yeah, Roberto Mancini. They actually had Mark Hughes was their manager for a little bit before, when they still had some of the good players or up and coming, buying a lot of the superstars. They actually had Mark Hughes be the manager, and I feel like Newcastle might need to go that route where they probably can't pluck the superstar manager right away, but they might need to go a route maybe finding a decent manager that's an upgrade over obviously Steve Bruce, but someone that can at least play a little bit of attractive football. Maybe not be he might not be the best manager, but he can at least get you somewhere close. And then once you're at that level, maybe you can attract one of the big managers to kind of come in, develop a style, win some trophies, and then from there, it just kind of domino effect of trickling down. And like, who else can you get after that?
I'm thinking Tony Pulis.
The
He's coming back. He's coming back from the
successor.
Premier League. I don't know.
Um,
It's like, because right now, as we mentioned, there's not really that many managers just kind of sitting around. You probably have to
yeah,
snag them from another club that's currently going, but
yeah.
that's a tricky one. Maybe it could be a Newcastle legend. Maybe Alan Shearer just comes back and decides to be a manager. I don't know how that really works. It doesn't really translate one for one. If you're a good player, you become a good manager.
Yeah, it's
So,
always tough. I
mhm.
know. I know. Last year when we were doing this, Mauricio Pochettino was the hot name because obviously he was still a free agent in the job market. Obviously now he's the PSG coach, but um, the rumor was that, okay, if we get Mauricio Pochettino, he can be the guy that spearheads the whole project. But now obviously that's not the case. There is Zidane, but Zidane is not going to join Newcastle. He wants the France national team job really badly. And there's a couple people out there, but I just don't think that any of the top names you see at the top clubs, I don't think they're willing to leave that position. Like you wouldn't see Jurgen Klopp just leave Liverpool just to join Newcastle. It's just not going to happen. So
Yeah. And then it would affect the integrity of certain managers if they decide, you know what, oh,
yeah.
I'm just going to go to Newcastle. All that money. So, I mean, I find it a little ironic too that like they're going to, Amanda Staveley and their team is going to possibly kick Steve Bruce out before, according to the rumors, before even the game kicks off against Tottenham this weekend. And I'm like, what are they gonna
It's a
do?
little,
Like, they don't even have anyone lined up. It's like I don't understand. Sometimes they just kick them out before you even have a replacement ready to go. Maybe it's like a statement just to kind of lay down. It's like, we mean business. We mean change. We're not gonna wait. We're just gonna do it as quickly as we can the right
should
way.
get
And I'm
Chris Coleman.
yeah, Chris Coleman, the
Send him
former
until I
Sunderland
die.
man.
um,
So I
But I
mean,
have seen like rumors from Newcastle fans that actually a lot of the players on that current team will actually be sold, or the process will be to try to sell them. I think the only players that you could realistically see staying are Alan St. Maximum, Mia Miron, maybe Callum Wilson. And then outside of that, slim pickings. It was not that they basically said they didn't want to see it. They had a couple players that they wanted to keep, but after that, it was just like, who else can we ship out and who can we bring in? But I've heard some, fantasy rumors of just, some Newcastle fans were like, realistically, we could, maybe get players that are unwanted at big clubs. So maybe the likes of like a Umtiti, Longley, a Coutinho, those
all
players
Barca.
are on, yeah, all Barca. But no, just like those players of that ilk where they're on huge contracts and no one else will really want to buy them. But Newcastle can come in and be like, hey, we have the money. Even if you flop, even if you flop, like, even if you flop, you can still join the club and you know basically start out your new career here. And I think Manchester City did that when they signed the likes of Robinho. Who else did they sign in that beginning era? I know they signed Robinho and a couple other players that were,
Tevez,
not
maybe.
exactly world class at that point, but they were getting there at a certain point.
Hmm. I mean, even for them, I feel like you kind of need a little bit of mix, where it's like you have some of those players that they should have been good, but then they weren't, and then also getting that next up and coming big star that's like a youth player, because I feel like that's also like a cornerstone. Like when AC Milan got Alexandre Pato, I mean, it was supposed to be like a next big star, but then since it failed, it's like, oh crap, what do we do? But
Hmm.
kind of basing it around that too. So I don't even like, right now Real Madrid just got Camavinga. I was gonna say that'd be a pretty good one, where it'd be a very low risk for them to bust. Maybe like a Joao Felix over at the Atletico, and kind of tongue twister right there. But like kind of players like that to also just have just ready to go that are kind of big names that will be next on the line, like Mbappe as well. But I don't see, with Newcastle at least, it's gonna be a little tricky to attract those kind of players right now, just because they don't even have European competition. It's like, and they're like, help us get out of the relegation zone, please. And like that's their appeal right now. It's like we have a lot of money, and like that's about it. But money
Hmm.
talks. But at the same time, I'm like, we'll see how far it can go. So
Yeah.
I mean, hmm, that is, I would think that'd probably be the model, just based on like what Yosh and I are seeing right now as like outsiders. We're not on the board. Who knows? Maybe Amanda's listening to this podcast right now. Like, listen out for taglines is like, who's saying my name a lot. So, and then that might influence. If we see Coutinho join the team in January, then we know she's listening. But it's just little things like that. But I definitely think it will take some time. They have 190 million pounds in terms of net profit, and I don't think they'll spend it all at once. I feel like it'd be a little foolish to do that, because what are you going to do if you bring in all these players? You have to sell the other players to make room. And not only that, you also have a chemistry that's already built amongst the players already in the club. Like, look, we'd even mention the player who's their captain, like Lascelles, or I keep hearing from Jimmy Conrad call him the Snails, so I can only remember him from that, the center back.
Jermaine Lachelles or
Yes,
Jamal Lachelles.
yeah. I was thinking, it's either Jamal or Jermaine,
Yeah,
but
it's Jamal.
Jamal. Okay, Jamal is, gosh dang, the Snails. We call him the Snails because he's basically really slow. But he was a decent center back in terms of who they currently have, because Fabian
Yeah.
Schär, usually injury prone, and then
He can hit a long shot though.
he can't hit a long shot. And then they also have like Mankio and
The
I
Bravka is
believe,
still there, right?
yeah, Dubravka, but he's injured right now. So I mean, and he just
Yeah.
signed like, I believe, like a 6-year contract too, not too long ago,
Oh,
or like a 5-year contract, like a long-term contract with Newcastle. So he's not
is
going
John
anywhere for
Joe
a
Shelby
while.
still there?
John Joe Shelby's still there, so like,
Dang,
I not gonna lie, I
Voldemort.
would probably replace John Joe.
Hot-headed Voldemort right there.
Yes. So I mean, they have all these players. It's like you have to kind of move them on as you bring in these new players. You can't just have more players than. um, is there a squad limit in the Premier League?
I think
I
there
believe
is.
there is.
Well, there's also the yeah, and I will also say it would be really hard to pluck any top European player that's playing in Champions League right now to go play in like a relegation battle, Newcastle.
Hmm.
Like I just feel like it's just not possible. Like, it just would
And
be like
then
impossible to do.
on top of that too, Newcastle's not most ideal place to move to, if we're being honest. Like in terms of just the climate, like literal weather over there. Like
Yeah,
this is the kind of thing I would see in career mode where it's like, I miss the climate back at home. I kind of want to move out. Like I would see something like that if you had a Newcastle player, just because, it's not California. It's not, Spain. This is
yeah.
literally like the equivalent of like Seattle in like February. It's just
Sh-
constantly raining, just kind of
Cold.
muggy, kind of cold, just sad. You don't really see the sun. So on top of that, it's like, is that all that money really worth it? Because you're gonna be going over there. It's gonna be kind of rough over there. So
Hmm.
that's also something that they kind of take into account too, because it's like literally that the not only play for the club, but that they live there. So
Yeah.
the train that they live there, and it's just like, can you really convince someone like Erling Haaland to leave Dortmund right now and say, "Look at beautiful Newcastle. Look at all we can provide to you. We can provide to you the the Atlantic Ocean and all the ports and all this." Is like,
I'd stay in Germany.
yeah, I'd stay in Germany too. And also they're in Champions League right now, so
Yeah.
got that.
So it'll be interesting to see kind of how what develops in terms of when January hits, who they actually can go out and buy, who actually comes in, who leaves, who the new manager is. I feel like we may not see huge wholesale changes this transfer window or this upcoming one, but definitely during the summer, I feel like that's when they're going to start making a lot of moves and seeing where they're at in terms of mentality and where they're trying to take the club. But you
Mhm.
know, that's definitely the Newcastle new ownership has just been something that's just been on our heads. And unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to talk about last week because as soon as we recorded, the day after they announced this, so it'll be interesting to kind of see what happens and the potential pushbacks, anything that happens in the future, whether the new ownership gets revoked, we never know. So we'll
Yeah.
obviously be here to provide the updates for anything that could happen and will happen when it comes to this. But I wanted to shift the conversation to two big teams that dealt with a bit of an injury bug during the international break. I guess I could start off with the Manchester United. Raphael Varane in the UEFA Nations League final for France went down with a groin injury, got subbed off, I think, at halftime or just a little bit after halftime. And United basically announced, or they did announce, that he will be injured for the next couple of weeks. And this is really bad news for Manchester United fans because Harry Maguire went down with the calf injury in the Aston Villa game, and he's still on the verge or still on the process of recovering. He hasn't practiced in any first team training yet, so he might be out for maybe another couple of weeks. So a big injury bug in the two top center backs for Manchester United, and now they're essentially relying on Victor Lindelof, Eric Bailly, who's most likely going to get injured, and Phil Jones. That's all we have. That's literally all we have for center backs. So pray for us because this is a really tough run of fixtures that Manchester United have because they play Leicester City, then they play Atalanta in the Champions League, then they have Liverpool, then they have Tottenham, and then they play Atalanta again in the Champions League, and then they have the Manchester Derby. So it is a really, really tough run of fixtures and a really horrible time to lose your top two center backs.
I mean, you got Phil Jones, and you don't want to forget about that, the forgotten man. Maybe he'll go to Newcastle. Who knows? But I feel like for Manchester United right now, it's kind of ironic that it's just like, all right, there's on such a big high, and then now it's just like, all right, it's back to same old last year. So I mean, I feel like injuries, that's the thing about injuries too. It's just like they come with the sport, whether you're playing professionally or just playing recreational or just playing pickup. They kind of come with the sport. So it's kind of having like those worst case scenarios and those disaster recovery plans. But for Manchester United, it's just so bad. Like, like what is going on?
It's like bad luck. It's like what happened to Liverpool last season with Van Dijk
Yeah.
going
So
out, then Gomez went down, then Matip went down, and then you know, it's just everyone keeps going down, and then you're just out to like youth center backs at this point.
just do the Ronaldo fitness routine, because this man usually is never injured and he's like 36. So I feel like I don't know, but I mean, they'll also kind of add on top of that. I'm gonna go on my own rant too with just Liverpool, just because you know every time there's an international break, there's always one Liverpool player I feel like that always gets injured. Usually it's Joe Gomez, but this This time it was Diogo Jota, and it was injured with an undisclosed muscular injury. So we who knows what could that be? That could be like groin, it could be your thumb, it could be anything. But that means, Roberto Firmino will probably start this weekend. But I mean, it's kind of always sus. It's like there's a sniper in the building just going after Liverpool players every single international break. That's all I'm gonna say. We're just gonna there's a pattern that we're starting to see. Not so clever, whoever you are, going after our players, but it's kind of rough. Do you feel like this is something we didn't really have kind of written down, but it's just like, do you feel like there should be more breaks, like literal physical breaks put into a season to kind of give some players rest? Or do you feel like what they have now is still all right? Because like not everyone goes and plays for their country in every international break.
Yeah, I feel like there definitely should be actually more breaks be put in for the players. I mean, obviously as a fans, it sucks because we get less sport to watch. But with the talks of them maybe moving the World Cup into a biannual thing where it's every 2 years instead of every 4 years, and the Euros, and then not to mention you have basically international friendlies going on year long. These players essentially get no breaks. I know Courtois went on a rant when Italy and Belgium played in the third and fourth place game for the UEFA Nations League competition, and he just went on a rant after Belgium got third place, or Belgium finished in fourth place actually. And he just went on a rant saying that UEFA, FIFA, the governing bodies, they don't care about us. All they care about is money, because we're basically being like run to the floor, like we're constantly playing. And then when you constantly play, you pick up injuries. And then when you pick up injuries, like you can't play. And then when you can't play, the team struggles, and it's just a cycle that keeps going on. And I think, I think that's been a problem. I think we have mentioned it, in other podcast episodes, just the run of games that these players go through. It's just they're playing every single week. And not to mention, I think, they're coming back for club competition in these coming 4 weeks, but then after that, they go back to another international break to play more World Cup qualifiers. So it's just the never ending basically amount of games. It just never stops. And I feel like it's not good for anyone's health to do that.
Mhm. I feel bad for those who have to fly to other continents for their
Yeah.
qualifying competitions, like in Asia for South Korea or maybe for
Like the
Senegal and
US men's national team players.
even US too. You have to fly across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
So that time zone difference and everything, because it kind of got me thinking about it. Even when I saw like the NFL game that happened in London this past weekend, I'm
Hmm.
like, how are these people adjusting? How are these
Yeah.
players adjusting to London? They're literally 5 hours ahead now, and they're just playing like a full contact sport and just like full. This is like a regular season game. So for them, I mean, they played a UEFA Nations League final during the middle of like the regular season for soccer, which is kind of weird. I didn't even realize it was even happening until I saw it live. I was like, oh, why is there a final going on right now in the middle of at the beginning of October? And it was
Hmm.
France versus Spain, and Mbappe scored like a basically offside goal to win it all. And I was like, is this trophy even mean anything? It's like they have so many superstar players on the team. I'm like, I don't even know if people even realize this was going on. It's like,
Yeah, I think it caught a lot of people off storm. And then, not to mention that, there's also the fact that the next World Cup, the 2022 World Cup, will literally be played in the middle of the club season. Like it's gonna it's gonna be played in the middle of October, November. So that's also a thing too.
it's, I don't, I don't, I don't like that. And also, it's just like certain competitions such as like World Cup. I still feel like it should be every 4 years and not
Hmm.
too frequent, just because I feel like if it's as common, then it's gonna be not as prestigious to win. It's like
Yeah,
we'll just get it next 2 years.
yes,
Where
farmers
it's like
trophy.
you start seeing like certain players, like I remember like some of the older players when they know when they exit the tournament, like Chiellini or Minucci, someone like that, when they exit the tournament and they know it's like, oh, that's probably my last World Cup. Or like if you see a player going at like Royce, like at 29, it's like I finally get to go. I missed like the first two because of injury, and it means
Hmm.
so much to them to finally go in, even if it's really late in their career. So like that kind of magic from the World Cup, and also just that kind of tradition, I feel like shouldn't be changed. And it would lose some of its pedigree if you just have it every 2 years. It's like, oh, it's like at that point it's almost annual, and it's like almost you have the same teams from World Cup to World Cup at that point almost. Whereas like you
Yeah.
can see from like 2014 to 2018, like some teams were almost completely different.
Yeah. And
So,
it's also like I agree too. I think the World Cup every 4 years that's one of the reasons why it's so magical from the women's and men's game is just that you have to wait so long to play it, and then you have to qualify for it, and then there's instances where some of the big nations don't qualify because they don't get the job done during qualifying.
mhm,
Hint the U.S., but um, when it happens every four
Europe.
years, you get so many magical moments. Players like James Rodriguez coming out in 2014, the Shabalala goal in like 2010. You know, magical moments throughout that just you don't get if it's not coming every 4 years essentially.
Mhm.
So
How's it gonna work in the winter for the Qatar? I didn't even think about that till now.
yes,
That could be his
the
own
reason they're
podcast
playing it
episode.
in the middle of the season is because it gets way too hot in the summer that it would literally be like physically impossible to play in the summer because it just gets too hot in
Mhm,
Qatar, and that's why they have to put it in the middle of the um, club season because that's when it's cooler in Qatar. But I don't know exactly how they're going to do it. Whether they're going to pause the club season or if the club season's still going to go on just with the people that haven't been picked for the national team. And that's like when you get in a really sticky situation because obviously Liverpool, Manchester United's of the world are not going to be like, well, we don't want to suck. Like we want to continue being in the top four in Champions League. So it's like you can't like if you leave for your national team, like you know, you're not going to come back here and play for us. You know,
mhm.
so I don't know what they're going to do. It's a really tricky situation. And obviously, FIFA put themselves in this bind by going for the money and, disregarding everything else that happens and just caring about money. That's what happens.
Gosh, maybe that's how Newcastle wins the Premier League. They just buy all the players that aren't going to the World Cup. It's like, all right, which one's not going to make it into the squad?
Hey, Norwich
Ah,
could actually
yes,
not get relegated.
yeah, maybe. It's gonna be just all youth players playing, and maybe like the US qual. No, wait, no, they're still in qualifying. I was like, the US not qualify again. It's like
No,
maybe
no.
Pulisic will finally play, but nah, we're still in qualifying. We're
Yeah.
good. But
So,
jeez, that'll be something we'll talk about obviously in about a year from now because that's probably
yeah,
when
it's,
it'll be
it's
taking
coming
place.
up. It's literally coming up. It's
Ooh,
not too far away, which is crazy.
I'm excited, but also at the same
Yeah.
time, I'm like, man, it's not in the summer. It's not the
I
same.
know.
It's not
That's
the
the
same. We're
magical
just
part.
celebrating and you're wearing a coat.
Yeah. It's not right. Not right. Game's gone, as we always say.
Game's gone.
But yeah, injury bug has definitely plagued Manchester United, Liverpool. I feel like Manchester United got really hit with the worst of it. They're kind of getting what Liverpool got last season, where all the top players, the top center backs at least, keep getting injured. So now they have to reshuffle and figure out what they're going to do. But yeah, Liverpool and United getting hit with the injury bug, and we wanted to move on to the last section, the preview section. Um, Not a big blockbuster game in terms of like top six versus top six this weekend, but a couple decent matchups. For the first one, we got Brentford versus Chelsea. Brentford have been kind of the surprise team of the Premier League this season in terms of being a newly promoted side, playing with no fear. Almost had Liverpool, almost beat them, had them on the ropes, and now they're playing a Chelsea team that yeah, they've won, but I feel like Chelsea haven't been exactly the most glamorous. I feel like they've kind of lost a little bit of luster the past couple of weeks. So be interesting to see how Chelsea kind of handle a Brentford side that are going to be playing at home and how they're going to handle, Brentford just basically coming at them at full force. But even though I said all that, I still think Chelsea's a really good team. So I think they'll probably win 2-1.
Brentford has been the key wild card of the season, whereas they're kind of like the Huddersfield during that first season. They were in the Premier League, where they kind of just surprised everyone and managed to stay up
hmm
pretty comfortably. And also like Sheffield United as well during that one season, they got almost in a European competition. So there's always one random team that does it, and it looks like this season is Brentford. And I feel like they're still on that high. Sometimes having international breaks does break that momentum, but at the same time, they also just recently drew against Liverpool, and that kind of high I still feel like will be there. And also on top of that, a lot of those players usually on these smaller teams aren't going to play for the international teams because if they're on the smaller teams, unless they play for some random country like San Marino and like they're their top goal scorer, or they play for one of those other smaller nations. But usually if it's a Spanish player or like an English player on Brentford or something, it's usually they're not going to get called up. There's no way like someone from that country's playing there unless you like Cucurella, I guess, playing for Brighton. But I think they're probably going to be refreshed compared to a lot of players on Chelsea who were gone on international break. And that kind of jogginess and kind of coming back, getting back in the time zone and all that. And the fact that Chelsea, as you said, Yash, aren't really as glamorous as we anticipated with all the new signings with Lukaku and also just bringing back all those key stars. I think it could be a point where it could be Brentford drawing 2-2. So I'm
Dang.
going to go with a 2-2 draw.
All right, I'm going 2-1 Chelsea win. He's going 2-2. And then we have Newcastle versus Tottenham. Obviously, Newcastle are kind of going to be in the spotlight because of the new ownership, where the energy is. Maybe Steve Bruce is not even the manager in the dugout when he enters, when this game happens. So we'll see. And then Tottenham, um, bit of a weird one because I know for England, when Harry Kane started their previous match, he did not look very good for England or didn't look very sharp at all. So Harry Kane's lackluster form for Tottenham has kind of carried over to his England national duties. Um, Obviously, they have Hyun Min Son, but I don't know. I feel like with the new energy, Newcastle, that place is just going to be rocking. Like I feel like the Newcastle, the crowd, the home crowd, the fans, the players, they're just going to have this new energy that they just haven't had in such a long time. Obviously, with the ownership with Mike Ashley, but with the new ownership, I just feel like the crowd is just going to be rocking. Alan Said Maximum is probably going to do some saucy skill moves. Miguel Almiron is probably going to play. They're just going to want to see something, and they're going to get the crowd and they're going to get the players excited. So I actually think Newcastle can they'll come in and beat Tottenham. I think it will actually be I would go 3-2. I think Newcastle can beat Tottenham 3-2. I feel like, Tottenham can answer back with the quality they have, but I feel like Newcastle's energy in the crowd will probably push them over the edge for 3-2. 3-2 win.
There's a lot of storylines that can come out of this, and this is a big vibe check to see how Newcastle are going to be under the new ownership. And I feel like I believe you, Yash, in terms of having that big new owner energy, but not having a manager possibly, and even having Steve Bruce, not the greatest. So I think that new energy is going to put them up like 1-0. But Newcastle always is a really hard club to support. They always kind of disappoint. It's kind of like a more extreme version of Tottenham. So I think they're going to go 1-0 up first, and then Tottenham's going to score two, and they're going to lose
Dang.
2-1 at like the
Oh.
like the last 10 minutes. Like it's all going to unfold, and then that's going to set the tone where it's like there needs to be change at Newcastle, and it's going to have to start with some of the players foundationally, and then also with just the management and just tactics alone.
Hmm.
So, hopefully from there it'll just be only up. But I think it'll be a 2-1. Despite Newcastle actually scoring more goals than Tottenham this season so far, which is even crazy to say. But I think something ironic like that is gonna happen. So I'm gonna say 2-1 to
Yeah.
Tottenham.
Yeah, I see that. I definitely can see like Tottenham winning, but I think the Newcastle vibe will probably carry them through for the win. But it'll be exciting to see actually what happens in that game because I think a lot of eyes will probably be on that game. And then
Mhm.
finally, the biggest matchup of the weekend is Leicester City versus Manchester United. I mentioned the injury crisis that Manchester United are dealing with right now. We'll probably see an Eric Bailly and Victor Lindelof center back partnership. Um, not the most confident because if you've watched Manchester United this season, they've been very open in the midfield because Fred and McTominay just haven't been getting the job done there. So they're going to be very open to counterattacks. Leicester City can play really well on the counterattack, with the likes of Vardy, Kelechi, and Nacho. They have players that can hurt you on the counterattack. This is going to be, um, at Leicester's home ground. It's going to be a tough place. Brendan Rodgers will have Leicester playing in a good way. Um, so this one's going to be a tough one. I don't think Manchester United will lose, but also I don't think they'll be able to win because I think the center back partnership will probably end up costing them. There's a mistake when Lindelof and Bailly play together. There's always a mistake between one of them. So I think this game will actually end up being a 1-1.
I think I'm gonna go straight up, just say United win this 2-1. Just because
Oh, wow.
Leicester,
Hey.
they haven't been the same Leicester as years past. Like they're right now
Hmm.
sitting at 13th, and Vardy's he's always been like, oh, he's old, but he's always, one of those, he has that boomer energy. He just keeps going. We don't know how, but he just I guess it's all the Red Bull he drinks. But I mean, this season, there's not really as much help for Vardy either. Like James Madison's for some reason is just on decline, and it's like
Yeah.
a steep decline where it's the point where it's like everyone's thinking it's like, oh, I'm glad we didn't get him. We dodged a bullet there. But I mean, James Madison is worse now than when he first went to Leicester, in my opinion. It's like,
Yeah.
what's going on? To the point where even last season we saw him like get subbed in after 60th, the 60th minute typically is when he would get his playing time. Now this season is like we're lucky to see him, and or even lucky to hear about him. It's like you're gonna forget the Leicester number 10, but also just this team itself. They're conceding a decent amount of goals per game, and they're just not as clinical in front of goal in terms of creating chances. That classic counter-attacking Leicester, it just really hasn't hit the ball running yet
Mm-hmm.
this season. And against a Manchester United side that's basically weakened in the back, they have all the opportunity, but in terms of just firepower, I think Manchester United have a little bit more of the edge there. So I think they'll get the 2-1.
Dang, you never know. I think everyone was making jokes is that Ole's magic juju will come in place, and they'll probably go on 7-game unbeaten run without Maguire and Varane in the back. But I don't know. I don't have that much confidence, so I'm going 1-1. But Tyler's looking out for me. He's going for the 2-1 United win there, hopefully. So I'm hoping that ends up becoming true. But with that wraps up season 4, episode 128 for us. As we always say, you can check out the podcast on YouTube, watch the video version where you can subscribe to us there at the Premier Pod. You can also give us a follow on our social media pages, Instagram and Twitter at the Premier Pod. Leave us any questions that you may have for any future episodes or anything you would like us to discuss in the future. You can leave it there down below. And also, if you listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, you can help us out by leaving a rating and a review. Helps us out, gets us noticed to more people. But if you don't want to leave a review, just want to listen, that's totally fine. And if you want to share this podcast with anyone or a friend that's interested in Premier League or soccer, that's greatly appreciated. We appreciate the support any way we get it. Thank you again for tuning in and listening to season 4, episode 128 of the Premier Pod. Thank you guys. Peace.
Peace.